Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. I sincerely hope that everybody's doing okay out there. It's finally a little bit warmer where I live. It took a really long time this year, super long winter. Anyways, I am here with another video, and for this one I just wanted to do a question and answer session because I haven't really had any specific topics in my mind to make videos about. It's one of the reasons why I haven't made any new videos, I guess, but I definitely recorded some footage of sketches and warm-ups and whatnot. So earlier today, I decided to ask you guys if you had any questions for me, and I have collected several of which I thought were interesting questions and some stuff that I actually have been wanting to talk about. So I'm just going to do that, and hopefully eventually I'll come up with more specific topics to tackle in longer format in future videos. Anyway, so I'm just going to start with a very basic question, which is, why did I start drawing? I don't know if I'm supposed to announce who asked the question, a person's username. I'm not sure, so I guess I'll just skip it for now, and maybe in future videos I will make it more specific. So the question is, why did you start drawing? And the answer to that is a little bit complicated. I remember I've always been predisposed to art, I suppose. That's always just something that I really liked. I think a lot of little kids like drawing. I'm not 100% sure if it's the same for everyone, but it is a pretty common thing. But for me, it kind of just lasted, and it outgrew most other things that I was interested in. So my favorite thing to do was always to draw. And when I started drawing more regularly, and I guess taking it more seriously, so to speak, was when I came to Canada with my parents when I was 11. And I mostly kind of used it as a coping mechanism with the immigration, I guess, because obviously I felt pretty out of place, and I had a lot of things going on in my mind and things were very weird, and I found that just drawing a lot helped me kind of cope with a lot of the changes that I was going through. So yeah, I suppose those are some reasons, but overall it's just always been something I naturally gravitated toward, and it wasn't like a conscious choice or anything like that. Okay, so the next question is, do you prefer doing digital or traditional work, and what do you feel are the pros and cons of both? Do you think one medium reflects your style better than the other? I thought that was a really good and really interesting question because it's actually something I have to think about. So to answer the first half of it, which one do I prefer and what are the pros and cons? So I don't think I actually prefer either one of them. I'm very 50-50. I don't know how common that is. I certainly know other artists who kind of do both, but I don't know. As far as I'm concerned, I'm very much neither here nor there. So I like both equally. And as for pros and cons, I'm going to say that I think traditional artwork is more valuable, as in it has more physical value. So you're creating kind of like an object, if that makes any sense. Whereas digital art is easier to reproduce, I suppose, and it doesn't have any inherent value in the piece. So like selling digital art, you're only essentially selling reproductions of it, whereas the original has value in itself. So there's that. I do think that traditional art is more difficult than digital in many ways. I think it's also somewhat more limited though, so I suppose a con for traditional art would be limitations, and a pro for digital art would be no limitations. But that could also be a con, because sometimes having no limitations can make the process a lot more complicated. So for instance, if you want to create a digital piece and you only have a certain amount of tools at your disposal, it's a lot easier to figure out what to do with them because they're finite and they are limited. So a lot of constrictions are set in place for you in regards to the tools that you own, whereas with digital art, there's so many things you can do with a program, even a simple program, so it can be quite challenging to narrow down exactly where you want to go with any given piece. So there's that. I mean, it's actually a really interesting topic, so maybe I'll save this for a longer video where I will actually make a list ahead of time and go through each point at length, but I think that's sufficient for now. And as for the second part of that question, which was, do I think one medium reflects my style better than the other? That one was really interesting to me as well, because I honestly don't know. The way that I feel about my art fluctuates quite a bit. I mean, overall, I'm fine with it. I don't think I have any like crazy crises when it comes to that at this point. But I do sometimes wonder about where my art is going and whether it's going in the direction that I want it to or not. And I can't say which one reflects my style better. I'm not sure, because the way that I draw is quite different traditionally versus digitally. And I honestly don't really know where I want to go with my art long term, mostly because I am very much attracted to variety. So I really like having, I really like experimenting with different mediums and even with different styles to a certain extent. So I'm really not sure which one is the one. All I know is that there is a bunch that I kind of flop around between, if that makes any sense. And actually, one thing that I wanted to mention in regards to style is that I do a lot of client work on a regular basis, and all of my client work is, in fact, digital art. And I do have a very kind of honed in process that I've arrived at over the past several years, or actually I suppose even longer than that, maybe like a decade or more. So this process that I use these days is something I'm very familiar with at this point, and I guess often I do have to kind of bend a little bit to suit the client's needs, and sometimes I wonder if bending all the time to suit a certain client's needs actually warps my style in a direction in which I don't want it to go in. That's something I've been thinking about recently. I think it is something that's happening because I've noticed that there's some weird stuff going on with proportions with my art that I can see kind of occurring in even personal pieces that aren't client work that I haven't previously noticed, and I can see how it's kind of a bleed over from a regular client that I work for or work with. So yeah, that's kind of an interesting one. That's something I'm not sure how I feel about. I feel like maybe now that I'm conscious of it, I can maybe dedicate some more time to kind of backtrack and find the point at which I thought my art was going in the right direction personally, and maybe kind of go back to that and maybe even just dedicate some time to practicing drawing in that specific way so that I don't lose it, and be more conscious of what bleeds over from my client work. I know that it sounds kind of vague when I talk about it, but I guess to put a little bit more context to that, a lot of my client work is character design currently. Character designs for like kids shows, mostly girly kids shows, I guess. And it's work that I really enjoy, but I do have to modify the proportions, obviously, because the characters are often much younger than characters that I draw for fun for myself. And often, obviously, for kids shows, like, there are certain restrictions. Like, obviously, you're not dealing with any sort of melancholic things or anything dark. It's all very much on the happy, like, bright and cheerful side. So That's also something that's a little bit, like, it's getting weird at this point because I draw that kind of stuff so much, and I suppose it is kind of different from the stuff that I like to draw on my own. So yeah, as usual, I managed to completely derail the conversation. What was this about? Digital versus traditional, right? So yeah, I don't know, it's a tough one. It's definitely an interesting question though, and I do think I answered it to some extent, I suppose. So I'll just move on to the next question now. Okay, so the next question is, how long did it take you to find your style? Which is kind of relevant to what I was just talking about. I wasn't sure if I was going to answer this question because I thought it was a little bit redundant, because I feel like it should really be common knowledge at this point that a style isn't something you consciously seek, nor is it something you ever really find decisively, I don't think. But yeah, so I guess I'll just reiterate on that. I don't think I've really found my style. I don't really know what my style is. I can see it changing constantly over the years. It always changes into something. Even though I'm relatively comfortable, or at least there have been times where I've been relatively comfortable with what it is, I don't really sweat it too much. I just kind of take it from piece to piece. What I'm most concerned about, generally speaking, is the process and the breakdown of the process and how streamlined it is and how quickly I can get stuff done and how practical it is overall. Whereas stylistically, I mean, those two things are somewhat related because the process that you use to get to the final product obviously is going to affect how, like, the style, I guess, of what you're doing. But overall, the way that I see style is more like smaller decisions, like the micro decisions that you make in a piece, like, you know, things like composition, proportions, the way you render things, the colors that you choose, the lines where you place them, the angles, etc. And stuff like that just kind of morphs over time, whether you like it or not. And so, yeah, to answer the question, I don't know how long it took me because I feel like I haven't really found it yet. But I can also say that maybe for the first 5 years or so, it was very unclear. You know what, I'm gonna say maybe like 4 years. So maybe around when I was 15 or 16 is when something that I might refer to as a style kind of started to emerge. So it did take a few years to get to any point where I could even call whatever artwork I was making as belonging to some sort of style, or something started to emerge that was my personal thing, I suppose. But it has obviously changed a lot since then. So yeah, I don't know. A style isn't something that's going to show right off the bat when you start drawing, that's for sure. So I guess if that helps also to answer the question. It takes time. Be patient with it and don't question it too much. And I guess don't focus on it too much is my advice, even though nobody asked for advice. But yeah. So I think I'm going to move on to the next question now, which is, if you could tell your younger self one thing when you started art, what would it be? I always have trouble with questions like this because there are very, very many things, a great many things that I would tell myself. But if I had to pick one, I mean, I guess it would be to worry less, to just stop worrying, because I did worry a lot about all sorts of dumb shit that didn't matter. But, you know, that's kind of stupid advice because you can't really stop worrying just because somebody tells you to. I guess in relation to art, I would give myself a long talk and probably explain the fact that when you're younger is when you have the most time and the most free time, I should say. And there are a bunch of things that I would say I did right that I wouldn't want to change. There isn't a whole lot I would change from when I started drawing, like when I was younger. Like, for instance, one of the things is that I wasted very little time on things like TV, I suppose. I mean, I watched some TV, but I mean, every decision that you make when you're younger, kind of like what you choose to spend your time on, kind of ends up reflecting who you become later on. So, like, I actually have become aware of the fact that because I didn't consume that much media, I'm pretty unaware of a lot of pop culture or like just cultural things that happened, I guess, even when I was growing up. Like, there's a ton of things that I don't know what the hell people are talking to. There's a ton of references that people make that go right over my head, and I suspect that this is the direct result of me not having paid enough attention to what was going on around me in the grand scheme of things, maybe. I guess. But I can't say that's something I really regret, because I did just put in like a ton of hours into drawing, and that was predominantly what I was focused on. And I mean, obviously, like, I read manga and stuff a lot, but I did spend most of, I would say I spent at least 60% of my free time drawing, which is quite a lot, because God knows we have so much free time when we're kids or high school age or whatever. And plus, I skipped a lot of school too. Not that I condone that or anything, but that's something I did, and I did not waste that time on anything in particular, I guess, other than drawing. So yeah, no regrets there, whatever. So I what was the question again? What would I tell my younger self? Yeah, nothing. I would just tell myself to, like, relax. That's about it. I'm sorry if that was completely useless, but that's just how I feel. Okay, on to the next question, which is, I was wondering if you're going to do a studio tour, and are you going to do a video showing your art from when you were a kid? Yes and yes. I will probably do a studio tour. Well, if you can call it a studio. I just have like a little corner in the living room where I work. Yeah, I'll definitely do one. My place looks a lot better these days, actually, as of like a few days ago, because we finally washed the windows and it's very clean now, and I actually planted a bunch of plants that been waiting for to do this for a very long time, for like a couple of months now, because it's been so freaking cold over here. So yeah, the weather is finally nice, and I'm gonna just clean up a little more. I'm very self-conscious about stuff like this. I don't think I'd be comfortable with showing it as it is. Not that it's like particularly dirty or anything, but I definitely want to do some organization. And yeah, I'd love to show you guys my workspace. It's pretty compact, but I do think the condo where I live is very nice, so I'd love to show it to you guys. Yes. And the second question was, what was it? Am I going to show? Oh yeah, so my art when I was a kid. Yes. Actually, that's funny, because I did have the intention of making that art journey video that I talked about in a couple of, I don't know, a while ago, whatever. I remember mentioning it at some point. Yeah, so I took out the box that contains a lot of my art from when I was younger, and I gotta tell you guys, it was a very unpleasant experience, surprisingly. I don't know what it is. I think I really didn't expect it, you know? I thought it would be a lot of fun to, like, take out the box and rummage through all the stuff that I collected from when I was little, and I've never been the type to, like, throw sketchbooks out or anything like that, so I saved quite a lot of things. I mean, I did throw things out here and there when I really hated the art, but overall, I did manage to preserve a lot of drawing, all the way back from when I first came to Canada, I guess, so from when I was 11. But yeah, I don't know, there was just something about looking at all that art, and it was kind of like this weird trip down memory lane that I just wasn't ready for. I guess overall, my feelings about it were were that I hadn't realized how much I've changed since then. And I realized that the person that I used to be is somebody I no longer understand or can relate to in many ways, which is somewhat sad, I guess, because I have worked quite hard over the years to remember certain things about being in high school and middle school and being younger, because I really don't want to forget, because I've always found it kind of disheartening that older people, or like, I guess adults at the time, never seemed to understand what was wrong and such. Because a lot of things were wrong. I mean, I don't know. I was kind of a very depressive type of kid. As soon as I turned 13, for some reason, it just kind of flopped. Anyways, but yeah, I don't know. It was weird, and I was so off-put by seeing my old art and like the stuff that I used to write in my sketchbooks too. I just found it too like gross and personal, and I just didn't want to even see it myself, let alone like share it with other people. And obviously it was embarrassing. That's, that doesn't even need to get mentioned, I guess, because we all probably feel the same about art from when we were kids or younger or whatever. Yeah, I don't know. It was pretty bad, obviously. And yeah, it was pretty embarrassing. There's a lot of stuff that I realized that never even occurred to me when I was drawing that stuff. Like how inappropriate some of the shit was that I drew when I was in like middle school or whatever. And by inappropriate, I mean like, I don't know, it's hard to explain. Like, anime really does a thing, or like manga or whatever, there really is like some sort of weird over sexualization to it that it just recently occurred to me that I never understood when I was younger, that now I think is kind of weird looking back at it. But anyways, that's like a whole can of worms. Maybe, I think I do kind of owe it to you guys to show you what my art looked like when I was younger, and I really want to. So I think I'll just take a little bit of time to kind of process how I feel about that, and how I feel about the fact that I can't understand who I was back then anymore. And then maybe I'll pull the box back out and I'll pick some things out, and yes. So I will do that eventually. Alright, so I'm gonna move on to the next question, which is, what do you do to get out of art block, and how do you stay motivated to draw when you feel like you are stuck and aren't improving? Those are really good questions, and I will probably have a long answer to both of them. Okay, so I'm just gonna talk about art block first. My personal opinion on art block is probably not a popular opinion, but I honestly just don't think it's as big of a deal as it seems to be made in the art community, if that makes any sense. Like with anything else, sometimes there are off days and you just don't really feel like doing something. I mean, I don't know if that would qualify as art block. I feel like partially why it's such an over talked about thing or over discussed thing in the art community is because maybe the definition is unclear as to what does in fact constitute art block. The way that I understand it, I guess, is when you're just not having a good time at all, and what you're drawing seems to be looking like trash, and you don't understand why, and you just don't really want to draw anymore because it's just too off-putting and obnoxious. So yes, that actually happens to me quite often. There's a multitude of factors that make it so, some of which are actually improvement. So let me explain. Sometimes when you put some work into doing some studies or make a breakthrough that you don't necessarily notice, you will actually start seeing. So sometimes the breakthrough is mental, it's visual. So you start seeing something that you haven't really noticed before about your art, or something that didn't occur to you. And then once you finally click, like once the information clicks in your brain, you can all of a sudden see it, but your skill hasn't caught up to the knowledge yet. So when you look at your art, it will look significantly worse all of a sudden, and you might not understand why, but it could actually be that you have in fact improved. So now your art just looks a little bit worse to you because you can suddenly see some mistakes that you haven't noticed before. So that can definitely cause some bad feelings. That's one of the sources of an art block. I guess another one is probably just sometimes you just have a bad day. Like, the reason why I don't dwell on the subject of art block for too long is because I have had to meet deadlines for a very long time now. For as long as I can remember, I've had some sort of deadline here and there. Like, not like I'm dying or anything with constant deadlines and stuff, but the point that I'm trying to make is there have always been situations in which I have to complete some sort of artwork in a finite set amount of time, and I have to deliver, and that's something I have to do regardless of how I feel about it. So I kind of just learned to, get over it and just do it regardless of how it looks. If it looks like shit, well, that's just too bad. You just do your best to make it look okay, and you just move on. I guess that's how I always dealt with it anyway. And looking back, like, one of the more interesting things that I've noticed, like, I used to have this recurring job. I was working for this forum website, like avatar-based forum website, kind of like Gaia Online. It was called Arnia, and I do believe it has shut down some years ago, but regardless. So I did monthly artwork for that website for a few years. I think at least a couple of years back when I was in college. And so basically, it was this piece of art that included 2 characters that I had to do once a month, so at the end of each month. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but on top of schoolwork, it was honestly really, really hard for me to keep up with. But I always had to do it because I really liked the fact that I had a recurring gig. And although it honestly didn't pay very well, as a student, I guess, and at the time, the extra income really helped because I couldn't really do much else on the side. And taking commissions would have been too overwhelming. And plus, it really helped that there was a strict deadline because the artwork was something they used to promote new items that they released monthly. So I absolutely had to get it done on time. And that's one of the things that really taught me to just kind of deal with it and just roll with it, because my god, like, it was a roller coaster of an experience. And I had some months when I was so depressed and so down in the dumps, and the last thing I wanted to draw was that dumb shit with like a couple of really happy-go-lucky characters wearing some stupid silly outfit. And the style that it was in also wasn't really something I was particularly fond of, but it was something that I had to adhere to because that was the style of the website. And looking back at it, there are some pieces that I did for that website that looked absolutely horrible to me, and I cannot believe that I even handed it in, but it was fine. And I think the most important thing is that I managed to actually do it. And I suppose one of the reasons why it was fine is because I did kind of set a generally high standard overall. So even when I wasn't having the best day and when I was having a horrible day, the result was still okay. It wasn't like atrocious. Anyways, the point that I'm trying to make is dealing with art block is something that you just have to get used to doing. If you get used to drawing through it, it obviously will go away. It always does. Sometimes it lasts a little longer. Sometimes it just lasts like one piece. I don't know. But in terms of practical advice I can give, if you don't have any clients or any deadlines that you absolutely have to meet, I would say when you feel like you're in an art block, doing studies always helps, because sometimes being in an art block is like what you're drawing looks like garbage to you, and it makes you upset, and you don't want to deal with it, and you don't want to look at it. So if you just find an artist whose artwork you really love, and you want to do like little studies of solved artwork that has been done by somebody else that you find nice to look at, you can just do that and kind of try to learn from it. And by this I mean just, find a piece that you really like, figure out what you like about it, try to like copy it to the best of your ability, and while you're copying it, I guess analyze it. And obviously I'm talking about studies that are just like warm-ups in your sketchbook. You shouldn't do that for anything that you would consider like a finished piece that you might want to show people or like show off as something that you're proud of. These are whatever. Anyways, I'm completely going off the rails on this question, but yeah, hopefully that was a sufficient answer. So there are a couple of more questions that I copied down, but the runtime of this audio is starting to get a little long, and I do remember that I think I recorded like one snippet of a warm-up in real time that lasted about this long, so I'm just gonna cut it short here, and I will probably get more questions while I'm working on this video, so I'll just do another part or like another video in the near future answering more questions that I thought really good or were really good. So thank you guys for visiting my channel again. I apologize for the break that I took. I actually had a lot of work that piled up, and I had some deadlines that I had to meet in a pretty tight amount of time, so I didn't really have time to put towards my YouTube channel. But I am back, and I am planning to make my updates a little more frequent going forward. So I hope everyone's doing okay, great even, if hopefully that's the thing, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.